Transformers Generations has been going on for a really long time. Like, a really long time. The original waves of classics are as old to us today as Generation 2 was to them. Over the past 14 years, we've gotten updates of characters from a wide range of franchises, such as G1, G2, G1, Beast Wars, G1, Armada, G1, and of course, G1. One of the most prolific and significant molds which came out in Classics was the Seeker mold, which was used on and off for about 10 years with over 30 different uses. Naturally, it's shown its age, so in a shocking turn of events, Hasbro decided to give the Classics treatment to a Classics mold. Welcome to Kit Katastrophe. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Earthrise Voyager Class STARSCREAM. This figure came out in 2020 as part of Wave 1 of the Voyager assortment. Despite the Earthrise toy line still canonically taking place on Cybertron, STARSCREAM transforms into his traditional McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle alternate mode. Thank God. It's kind of funny how a return to Generation 1 accuracy is actually a nice change for the Seekers after Siege released all those Tetrajets at once. Yeah, I'm gonna get sick of this mold eventually too, but this is my first experience with it, so it's all, well, I can't say fresh. Before I bring out the original mold, let's take a look at this on its own terms. STARSCREAM's jet mode is cast in a matte gray plastic which balances the light and dark enough to get some really nice contrast in all of those panel lines crisscrossing all over the fuselage and wings. I don't even think this figure would need a once-over with a Sharpie, they're that crisp. I'm not sure what they've done to this particular batch of plastic, but it feels good in the hands. The only other meaningful plastic color on STARSCREAM is this candy blue used for the tail fins and engines. It's a little glossier than the gray, though it still looks and feels great. That, of course, means that all the red you see here is paint. Red and white stripes adorn the wings and tail fins, though on the latter, the red is a little too thinly applied. Same goes for the twin Decepticon badges on the wings. The purple used on these insignia contrasts well against the background, but the edges are muddied. The red up near the intakes, fortunately, was applied very well, giving this jet a hint of glossy glimmer. Sadly, this figure commits the mortal sin that many other jet transformers do, that being underkibble. From below, the arms, legs, and the torso are plainly visible, making it obvious how he transforms. Of course, it's a far cry from the embarrassment that was the Siege mold's undercarriage junk, but it's still disappointing to see on this figure nonetheless. It would have at least been nice to see what would become STARSCREAM's chest compress and reconfigure somehow. C'est la vie, I suppose. Slung under the wings are STARSCREAM's null rays, which are far more faithful to the original cartoon than prior interpretations, being all narrow and pointy. Now, I don't have classic STARSCREAM, and my Universe Acid Storm broke a long time ago, so for comparisons, we'll have to make do with a Generations Thundercracker. Putting them side by side clearly shows Earthrise STARSCREAM's inspiration. Not just because they both turn into F-15s, mind you, but the panel lines are all in the same places, and the undercarriage issues are nearly identical. Despite being one size class above his predecessor, Earthrise STARSCREAM's null rays are actually smaller than the originals, mostly due to the Classics mold opting to make them spring-loaded missile launchers. STARSCREAM's transformation starts out with taking the weapons off from under the wings, something which I know some people might bitch and moan about, but I'm fine with. From there, the transformation is almost entirely identical to that of the classic Seeker mold, with some improvements here and there. For starters, flipping the wings 180 degrees is far less nerve-wracking, as the joints themselves are far sturdier and more robust, and the wings themselves are designed to pop off if pressure is applied in the wrong direction. If my Universe Acid Storm featured that kind of assembly, maybe he'd still be around. Instead of a straight sliding mechanism to extend the legs, STARSCREAM's shins extend in a manner similar to almost every Combiner Wars Deluxe class figures, and while some might roll their eyes at recycling that transformation step for what seems to be the millionth time, I see the benefit that STARSCREAM's legs won't be collapsing under the weight of the torso anytime soon. Not that any of my classic Seekers have that problem. Unattaching the back from the front of the torso is far more tenuous on this figure, however, as flexing parts become somewhat necessary. Sure, this method results in a solid torso and fuselage, but surely there must have been another way to do this. The forearms extend from the biceps in a series of joints that may be confusing on the first run through, but become familiar rather quickly. Finally, the cockpit folds down onto Starscream's back, and reattaching the null rays to his shoulders is the piece de resistance. Well, damn, this sure is a Starscream. In any official capacity, this also happens to be the single greatest attempt at rendering the original cartoon model in 3D space yet. It looks like a Starscream, and sometimes that's all you really need, especially considering that Starscream's design is arguably one of the most experimented with G1 designs in recent history outside of Megatron. The size and proportions of this figure are basically spot on to what I want to see, even if Starscream was a little lankier in the cartoon. That doesn't mean I don't have my issues with it, as minor as they may be. For starters, the Decepticon symbols are upside down in robot mode, which I understand is accurate to some fictional appearance or another, but it bothers me. This is easily forgettable once you realize that the wings are able to swing backwards, which is something not found on the original Classics figure. Around the back dangles the nose of the jet, and I really wish that it was able to be stored away somewhere within the torso or something. It's known that we're getting the cone heads down the line, and their helmets don't turn into the nose of the jet, so I think greater care should have been taken to hide this part so the illusion won't be broken so easily. I guess it's one step above the original Classics mold since this nose cone doesn't impede Starscream's head articulation. This final issue is more of a your mileage may vary thing, but Starscream's torso and head are prone to paint chipping even after a couple transformations. The red paint around Starscream's mammary turbines seem to be the most affected, as that's where the jet mode comes in contact with the ground, and the black paint on Starscream's helmet chips where it meets the nose cone during transformation, revealing the blue plastic underneath. Despite that, the head sculpt is really nice, looking far better than Siege Starscream's uncanny mug. I just wish it was cast in the same black plastic. One of the reasons that Earthrise Starscream has been derided by some fans is due to his articulation. Now, his articulation is pretty standard and adequate for an Earthrise figure, and it is categorically better than the Classics mold, but it does lack a few joints that were found on the prior Siege mold. So let's just go through the rundown. Starting at the head, he has a ball joint that allows him to look 360 degrees all the way around really easy. He can look up, he can look down, he can tilt his head. This is a very great ball joint, and I really enjoy it. It's very expressive, and it's just perfect for Starscream, and I can't wait to use it on the other Seekers when they come out. The shoulders swivel forward all the way until they hit the wings, and backward all the way until they hit the wings. The wings themselves can fold 90 degrees backwards, like so, for that, but I like to keep them just a little bit splayed backwards. The null rays can point forward and up and stuff, just to get out the way. The biceps rotate 360 degrees all the way around, and the elbows bend just over 90 degrees, which is barely better than the Classics mold, which is kind of a shame. I was hoping they would be a little more double jointed in that we get a fuller curl, but this will have to do for now. There is nothing at the wrist. There was a joint at the wrist on the Siege figure, and it is missing on the Earthrise just due to how it's constructed. It has to move on this hinge here, though you can, bring the fist up like so for, I guess, more dynamicy in punching poses or something. I don't really know. There's nothing at the waist either, and that was something that was found on the Siege figure, and it's kind of a disappointment to many that it's not here on the Earthrise figure, though he does have a skirt that can move forward to allow for his kick, which doesn't go very high. The Siege figure's kick went a lot higher, though you can get it to go all the way up if you splay the leg outward. They can go just that far outward because of this shelf on his kidney. The Siege figure could do a full split, if you recall, so already we're getting pretty outshone by the Siege figure. The thighs swivel 360 degrees, which is pretty nice, and the knees bend 90 degrees, which, again, the Siege figure could do better. It could bend nearly 180 degrees because of that spring-loaded flap in the back. I mean, I understand why it can't do this, because it has to do all of this, but it's still disappointing all the same. The toe can point, and the heel can also point, though these fins here will go with the heel sometimes unless you just hold them in place. And finally, the ankles tilt, But some people complain about the tail fins connected to the feet, splaying outwards when you spread the ankles. It doesn't bother me whatsoever, but I know it is a complaint some people have had with this figure, and I just wanted to express that in this compilation, if you will. Now, I think Earthrise Starscream's posability is acceptable for a transforming figure from Hasbro, but it's still lacking compared to what we've gotten previously in just one line prior. Siege Starscream is categorically superior to Earthrise Starscream in terms of articulation. You can quantify how much better he is at posing. He has double-jointed elbows, he has a waist swivel, he has a higher kick and a deeper spread, he has a greater knee bend. It's basically no contest. If you want a more posable figure, go for the Siege one. But I think Earthrise is still worth it, because they're very different figures, and it's more up to your personal taste as to which you would prefer. Earthrise Starscream seems to be a rather divisive figure in some parts of the wider Transformers community. I understand some may take issue with this edition lifting its transformation and engineering nearly whole cloth from the antique classics design instead of doing something new, but I sort of see it in the same way I see the various forms of Studio Series Bumblebee. This figure is taking a tried and at the time successful design and doing its part to refine and better the overall experience, which in my eyes is warranted as the original mold is 14 years old already, and it was about time for a redo. Do I wish more Generations molds got the same treatment? Not quite, but I'm pretty happy they did it to Starscream. Of course, there are some elements I think could use a few more passes before this mold is truly perfect, such as the arguably lackluster articulation and kibble management, but I think this is a pretty strong figure in its own right, and I'm happy to have it in my collection. I have generally positive feelings towards this figure, and I'll give it the tentative rank of lovely, though I feel this figure could stand to move up or down a place sometimes. If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future, and feel free to suggest topics for future reviews down in the comments. When we return, we're going all the way back to the year 2007 to take a look at one of the biggest misfits in my collection. This has been Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.